Hello Internet, take two. So this week is about an interesting topic that actually wasn't originally the topic for this week. So I changed and pivoted topics on Tuesday due to the fact of having many conversations with friends and family and the emotional roller coasters that they're going on. And the reason they're going on these emotional roller coasters is that they're consuming a lot of either social media or they're consuming media from the main news outlets. And with these two kind of incoming inputs into their minds, they're basically taking what's been given to them from quote-unquote experts, and they're either following these claims that are either falsely claimed or might not necessarily be truly backed by good science, or they're seeing numbers and facts that are scaring them. So it's all these things that are happening, and they're not necessarily criticizing what's coming in. So the purpose of this week was for me to both reassure myself and to learn a bit more around the flaws in science, but also to look at some tips and tools on how to consume this information with a more critical and skeptical lens on this consumption of things. With that being said, this is a topic that I am a big fan of. So I love science. All my friends, coworkers, and family know that. I'm a big fan of it, and I realize that we need it to progress within humanity in general. But there are flaws, and this is the best tool that we have, but still it's a tool that has flaws. I'm going to focus on biology mainly focus on biology when I did the research, because this was a topic obviously being discussed now with the pandemic, but also it's something that tends to be discussed in most news outlets on headlines and research and things like that, just due to the fact that we humans are selfish and we want to know about how we can either live long lives, cure ourselves, and all that stuff, which makes sense. So the way I broke this post up, and I'll break it up in the video, or basically I'll list out some flaws and then I'll discuss some tips. I'm going to start with flaws. So I'm going to show an image here, and this image basically talks about relative and absolute risk. And most of the studies, most of the articles, most of the things that you see will be probably written out in relative risk instead of absolute risk. And that's strictly due to the fact that relative risk tends to get more clicks, and it's more interesting to look at, more entertaining and more shocking, because the numbers and the figures and the claims that can be made tend to be more drastic, either increasing or decreasing. So the image I'm showing here basically shows that new drug reduces cancer incidence by 50%. That's the relative side. And then the other one is new drug reduces cancer incidence from 2 per 1,000 to 1 per 1,000. Still a 50% reduction, but it's only 1 per 1,000. So the gist of this is basically, when you see these studies, you should ask yourself, is this relative or absolute? And if it is absolute and it's still drastic, then maybe it is something that's significant and practically useful or meaningful. If not, then maybe you should take a second guess. Now, to the other image, and the other image is basically talking about confounding variables. So in this image, basically it has ice cream, temperature, and murder rates. So a confounding variable is a hidden variable, something that's not seen either accidentally or on purpose. Mostly accidentally, especially in biology. And in this specific example, we have ice cream rates increasing, and we have murder rates increasing. So you can't necessarily correlate the two and say, okay, well, if we sell more ice cream and people eat more ice cream, then there's a chance of more people killing other people. That's a bad cause, a correlation between the two. And at the bottom, you see that there's a temperature. And when temperature increases, ice cream consumption increases. And when temperature increases, murder rates increase. And this is a more significant variable when it comes to actually trying to see some cause from a relationship. So that's another thing you should ask yourself, is when reading a study or seeing an article and seeing someone trying to extrapolate some sort of conclusion from an action, that you should think, okay, are there other variables that aren't being seen here that actually have a bigger impact? And that's another kind of red flag you should always kind of keep in the back of your head, even though if the science is sound, it has really great methods, and it's using the gold standard of everything, that still should be a question you ask yourself. There's a third one here, a flaw, that I'm actually not going to talk in too much depth here because it's too complicated, it'll take a lot of time, but I recommend you watch this video from Veritasium.
This raises the question, how much of the published research literature is actually false? The intuitive answer seems to be 5%. I mean, if everyone's using p less than 0.05 as a cutoff for statistical significance, you would expect 5 of every 100 results to be false positives. But that, unfortunately, grossly underestimates the problem. And here's why.
Now, in this video, he basically discusses this concept of p-values. And p-values in research and science is basically how significant something is. And when they say significant, our definition of significant tends to be practically significant, so it like actually means something to us. But for most researchers and scientists, it means statistical significance. So has this number reached below a specific threshold that's been set, which is usually 5%. And once this is set and you've kind of exceeded it, then you've reached statistical significance. And there's a lot of fundamental problems with this p-value, and one that you'll see in this video that's pointed out, which I think is important to point out here, is the incentive mechanism that we have built around the scientific area, or scientific research area, which is basically if you have enough significance in your research and you've made enough quote-unquote kind of findings and discoveries, then you'll have a better chance of getting published. And if you're published, then that means you get funding, and if you get funding, that means you get to continue your research and become a more prominent researcher. And this feedback loop is actually a negative one that's hurting the scientific field. So I think it's something you should definitely watch in the video. And now we'll move on to some tips and tools. So the tips and tools are, there are many, right? So there's a long list of different approaches of how to read articles and research papers and things like that. So it really just depends on two things. What kind of science are you reading? So is it biology, chemistry, physics, technology, whatever? And then the other one is why are you there? So are you an expert that you're trying to basically see what other experts are doing in the field, or are you just an average person like myself trying to soothe your emotions and your psychology from all this inbound of crazy media? And I have here 3 tips, but in the post I've linked to a bunch of different approaches where there's probably like 25 or 30 different tips and tactics on how you could read these. But the 3 here I think are good for an average person. So the first thing is, before you even start reading the research paper that you found through an article, so you've gotten an article and you say, okay, they've linked to the research paper that they're quoting. When you go to the paper, the first thing you do is you should look at the authors. So see exactly who are they working for, who are they working on behalf of. Because if it's a general institution, then there's a good chance that it's okay. But some specific institutions are either funded or have a specific agenda. One obvious example from the past is when the tobacco industry funded a lot of researchers to actually prove that lung cancer wasn't necessarily a cause, tobacco wasn't necessarily a cause of lung cancer. So it's always important to see who the authors are and who they're associated with. And the next one is a surprising one that actually helped me, which is when reading a research paper, in the beginning, there's always going to be this thing called an abstract, which is kind of like a conclusion and takeaways from the authors that have done the study. And usually most people just read the abstract and go on with their lives. But actually skipping the abstract has been helpful for me, because when reading the abstract, it actually biases you already from what the authors think that you should take away from this. So instead, actually go straight to the intro. Skip the abstract and go to the intro. And the last tip is skim on your first pass. So don't read the paper as if it were a book, because that's a mistake I've made many times, and I either fall asleep, get bored, or think that I'm an idiot, which are all probably true-ish. And when you skim it, it actually helps a lot because you're getting the gist of the paper without getting overwhelmed. So when I say skim, you should take no more than 10 minutes and read the intro, and then kind of skim through the section titles and the subsection titles, look at some of the graphs and charts, read the kind of details below them to get a gist of what they're saying, and then maybe read the conclusion. So when skimming through this whole thing, you kind of get an idea, an intuition of how this study was done, how it's like kind of what conclusions it's coming up with, and if they're semi-valid and verified. And if that's not enough, and you feel like you need to go back for more, then you can go through a second, more detailed pass. And when you go through the second, more detailed pass, then you can spend an hour to an hour and a half actually digging into the different pieces that you want to learn more about. With all that said, I want to leave you with a quote, which I think is quite important, and it's from a person that I really appreciate. His name's Richard Feynman. He's an amazing physicist and an even better teacher. And in this quote, it basically states that the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. And what I take away from this quote is that being skeptical is important, and having a critical lens on society is important, on the things that you're taking in, so you can actually emotionally regulate yourself and all the people around you. But what's even more important is actually being critical and skeptical of yourself, because we are actually the easiest people to fool ourselves. So I think that this quote, hopefully these tips, a little bit of insight into how science is done, you can go about your day, your life, being a little bit more critical and skeptical on the things you're allowing in, especially at moments like these. So with all that said, Internet, I will see you later.